You mentioned that his nickname was the Butcher. That's really a grim, sinister, graphic nickname. And I want to read a passage from your recent piece. You wrote this. You wrote about what he stood for, perpetrating some of the worst human rights abuses I've ever documented. It is the stuff of wild nightmares. And you talked about people who saw him while they were being tortured, who were tortured under his rule. Can you talk about their stories a little bit?
Absolutely. So over the last couple of years, I've been documenting different stories, and in particular of Iranians who were in prison in the 1980s, many of them because they were opposition figures, in particular belonging to a very controversial organization known as the MEK, which its goal is to essentially overthrow the Iranian regime. But they are referred to as terrorists by Tehran. But the sort of level of torture and suffering that many of these people went through in the 1980s, it was some of the worst things I've ever heard. And I remember going home and just absolutely having nightmares. We're talking about women who were 8 months pregnant that were being stomped on. We're talking about people that were being hung, were being executed, were being put in all sorts of horrible positions for days and days on end, people that were forced to watch their loved ones be executed and be hung. The degree to which what humans can do to other humans, really, I'd never heard anything more terrific. In one situation, there was a man that he was forced to eat his own eyebrows. Just really depraved things that you can't even imagine how people could come up with that. And this, again, this was all under Raisi's watch.
From your accounts, I mean, it was harrowing. You couldn't, like you said, you can't even think of how people come up with that type of torture. You also described him, or he was described as one of the architects of the kangaroo courts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, when he was part of this four-person committee sentencing people, and they may go and sort of stand before Raisi and three other judicial figures, they weren't really given a proper hearing the way that we know that in the United States. The decisions were essentially already made. They were often forced to confess things that they didn't do, and were essentially dealt these capital punishments without seeing a lawyer, without any real sense of justice. And unfortunately, we still see those kangaroo courts existing in Iran today.